Why Yandere Simulator? Why is that the comparison you made?
I was like clenching my ass cheeks hoping that you didn't say this.
You enjoyed Romeo and Juliet more than Hamlet?
Sarah J. Maas fun.
My brain is like racing now.
Oh no, Alex.
Good job, me. I really don't know how to speak.
Oh God! Can't do this. This is my guilty boner. Family listens to these. Never mind.
Don't you me?
We totally believe you, Dean.
That's still bigger than a city.
It's more than one planet.
Today's topic, everyone, is heteronormativity in storytelling. For everyone that isn't aware of what that word means, heteronormativity is the belief that heterosexuality, predicated on the gender binary, is the default, preferred, or normal mode of sexual orientation. It assumes that sexual and marital relations are most fitting between people of opposite sex. And it seems like there's a consensus that that you're kind of bringing two characters together that either shouldn't be brought together or like need more time to be well developed, because then it falls into a very familiar pattern of like these two characters being very, very interested in each other way too quickly, or built on a very poor foundation just for the sake of what exactly? Like for the sake of having another relationship in the book, or maybe having another ship for people to, to sail on, or like.
Let me say something to any authors or writers that are listening to this. No matter how many relationships you put into your books, people will always ship every single possible combination of characters together, and there is nothing you can do about it.
Yeah,
I promise you. Even the most absurd ships, you're probably thinking of two of your characters right now that are so like totally wrong for each other and going, there's no way anyone would ever ship this. You are wrong, and I am telling you that there is someone in the world who ships those two characters.
Yeah. And like it's even funny then, because going back to Throne of Glass, that's what a lot of I don't know if I can really confirm this, but I know that there was a small percentage of people before Manon and Dorian even became a thing that they wanted Manon and Dorian.
Yeah, they did.
And
that
look at that.
A thing.
Yeah, and look at that. It just happened a little bit too quickly.
Yeah.
So I guess let's look at... So we've already looked at some of the examples. So why don't we break down really like what it takes to, I guess, build a proper relationship. And keep in mind, like, just because we're saying that heteronormativity so far has been bad, that doesn't mean like any straight relationship in fiction is terrible. It just needs to be a thing. We're just now going to look at how it can be fixed. So yeah. I think the most obvious one is to take time with it.
I agree. If your characters met a week ago, they're not going to be like so head over heels in love with each other that they'll never love again, that kind of stuff. And I think putting that, because that's like a really, really common trope in YA novels. And I think that's really a really dangerous mindset to like push on, especially like because a lot of the people who read those books are going to be teenage girls, and they're going to start having those expectations for their own relationships. They're going to be like, one day I'm going to meet the perfect guy. I'm going to know he's the one immediately. We're going to have this strong, everlasting relationship. It's never going to end. We're going to be perfect for each other. And that's super dangerous, because there's going to be men in the world, and not just men. There's going to be people in the world that are going to take advantage of people with that mindset. And there are terrible people in the world. Don't make things easier for them.
Yeah. That's a big consequence. So like, to any authors out there, be mindful of what you're writing. Like, definitely be mindful of what you're writing. And I think going back into the conversation of like, how do we fix this? I think on top of being patient, like actually develop the relationship. Do you think we could actually backtrack a bit?
Sure. To
Yeah.
what?
So we were talking about YA examples, and
Mhm.
actually, I think before we get into the conversation of like how do we fix it, I think it'd probably be better if we backtrack by expanding on like the larger storytelling in general, so like movies, TV shows, all that stuff. Kind of like as more examples, because it feels like, I don't know, it'd just be more expansive if we talked larger media in general, because yeah. So we were looking at YA examples, but heteronormativity, I think, or at least the umbrella term of all the cons that come with heteronormative storytelling, is prevalent, I think, in movies, TV shows, video games even. And let's look at that first, really, before we talk about how we can address it properly. So like when it comes to like heteronormativity in, I think, movies and TV shows, like it's really something that like it's predominantly straight relationships.
Mhm.
So rarely do I see not just even gay relationships, but like any kind of like relationship outside of a straight sexual one. Like
Yeah.
you have best friend dynamics and whatever, but like even then it's just so, it just feels so disingenuous.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I know you want to have like a save like the Marvel stuff for a specific episode, but I think Marvel movies are particularly bad for this, in that like in every single, at least all the ones that I've seen, there's always like the main male character who's a superhero, and that's really cool. And then he has his beautiful assistant or whatever, and they always end up together. Or like the
Yeah.
woman that he meets or whatever. Like the first Thor movie was one that this really bugged me in, because like it's just, yeah, she's just there, he's there, then all of a sudden, they have feelings for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Woo.
Yeah. Yeah, you're so right though. Like the one relationship that kind of started all of it was what, Tony Stark and Pepper Potts.
Yeah, because Iron Man was the first one.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. So like after that it was Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter. Then it was Ant-Man and whatever Evangeline Lilly's character was. I don't remember what her name was. There's
Got Thor and Natalie Portman.
Yeah, there's Thor and Natalie Portman. There's Tom Holland's Spider-Man and Zendaya. There's even, there's Star-Lord and Gamora. There's like, there's such
There was like a weird thing going on between the Hulk and and what's her name, Black Widow.
Oh yeah, that's the one that like, that one feels super heteronormative.
That one came out of nowhere also.
Yeah, it was
I'm like,
introduced in Age of Ultron, and literally there had been no chemistry. They just decided to start doing it, and I'm like,
and also, like, I remember seeing a lot of people thought that, like, I mean, talking about Hawkeye is a whole other thing, but a lot of people thought Hawkeye and Black Widow had really good chemistry and were expecting them to be together, but then they weren't.
the only chemistry that they had was Budapest, and they never elaborated on it.
Yeah, just
That's literally
Marvel
it.
heteronormativity is a mess.
Yeah, I don't just. It's not thing like I've said it. I think I've said it before, but if I haven't, then I'll say it now. Just because we're calling out all of these things doesn't mean that we don't want. Doesn't mean that we want straight relationships to end, or we want thing. Like obviously, also we want a lot more LGBTQ or LGBTQIA plus relationships. Like we obviously want that, but just if you're going to write in relationships in general, don't make it heteronormative.
Just like learn how relationships work
Yeah,
and write them well.
exactly.
Stop
So
forcing the first man and woman that aren't already in a relationship together, like you're like smashing Barbie dolls' faces together.
yeah, exactly. And going back quickly to YA, like it's super important to not it's super important for two things actually. It's super important to not superimpose heteronormative relationships and also to promote more relationship dynamics in general.
Yeah.
So here comes the
Yeah.
part where where it's important that we talk about how we can address heteronormative relationships and how we can fix it, or like how we can work around this. And I had said this earlier, but basically the most important thing for me is to take time with your relationships. Like take time with developing how these characters interact, how they meet, like what are their common interests, how they what their chemistry is, and then don't always make them fuck each other. That's not no. That's such a thing.
Especially at like the first moment, especially at like the first given opportunity, because that's such a common thing where they'll know each other for like a few days, they're kind of dancing around each other, and then all of a sudden they're like, sleeping together, and you're like, okay, that came out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's fine thing. Like it's fine building the tension a little bit, but the thing is, when fan fiction is doing it a lot better than your own books can at developing a relationship over time, I'm like, dude.
I mean,
stop it.
Those slow burn fics are so good though.
They are. I'm getting into slow burn, but that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, so that's my big thing. And like it's only really a big thing because personally I'm of developing things over time anyway. Like, Alex mentioned slow burn, and like seriously, take your time with things. Like for me, like I've been taking my time developing Porter and Magna, who is my same-sex friendship slash ex relationship, I guess, because they are best friends, but they've also dated. And it's super important for me how I portray that, because I don't ever want it to feel like just because they're same sex, if it falls under any kind, like if any of it feels rushed, or if any of it feels like it's like Porter or Magna could easily be replaced by either a guy, or maybe it's all just falling under the same things that we've talked about, then I've just written a heteronormative relationship, which I think is super damaging when it comes to YA especially. And that's what I was trying to get at. Like, it's important nowadays to set good examples, especially because for like very young impressionable kids that are picking up your work, like you don't want to set a bad example, right? Personally, I don't want to. And like as much as I'm trying to make that reflective through my work, I'm hoping that more authors realize that for theirs.
Yeah. And kind of bouncing off of that, I just forgot what I was gonna say.
Like, were you gonna recommend one way for?
Yeah, well, I want to say, because I feel like we've kind of been saying this a little bit, and I kind of want to like catch myself before I say something too far. Is that not every relationship has to be romantic. I think and like I mean I don't just mean like obviously love a good romance when it's written well, which is not very often. But like I love a good romance. We need more platonic relationships in books. We need more like familial relationships in books, in stories in general, not just in books. But also, I feel like slut shaming is a really huge issue in heteronormativity. And sometimes people are not going to be in a relation like a romantic relationship. Maybe they have like a purely sexual relationship. And I think that's also something that we need to get better at normalizing, is like people having like casual sex in stories, because I feel like that's something that if there's a character in a book that does that, or in a story that does that, if it's a woman, she's, you know, she's, you know, she's, 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 always slut shamed for it. Like that's something that's not normalized.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really damaging as well because like a romantic relationship isn't going to be for everyone, or maybe sex is fun. Maybe someone just wants to hook up with someone, and if
Yeah.
there's a situation that works for that character, for that person, then I think that should also be normalized.
Yeah. So I guess.
And also, to jump on that and go the opposite direction, not everyone wants to have sex. So if
Yeah.
you have a romantic relationship that there's no sex in, that is also valid, and that is also something that should be normalized.
Mm-hmm. So I guess to kind of jump off a point you made earlier in like how many different kinds of storytelling there is, like that's another huge one for me. Like that is super important. There are so many different ways to tell stories nowadays that like through the main plots, subplots, character arcs, individual developments in general, you don't always need to incorporate like sex and romance. Like you really don't. One of my favorite stories of all time isn't even thing. It's not even like it's a video game, and that's God of War 2018. The relationship there is between a father and son, and that is a compelling narrative across what, like it's 20-30 hours. That's for some people, that's a whole series worth of books. Like how then could they have done such a good job comparing, how then could they have told such a good story without even mentioning, any kind of sex or romance, because there didn't need to be one. Like you had a female main character, but there wasn't any kind of, like there weren't any hints of, flirting, any kind of intimacy, because that wasn't the point, and it was a better story because of it.
Yeah.
Like there's so many things like with, and that's just God of War, right? With Horizon Zero, and I'm talking about video game stories specifically, but with Horizon Zero Dawn, the main character Aloy, there is no thing. There isn't any kind of intimate relationship kind of, or like any, I guess, like romantic relationships that this character has. She's so focused on her goals, and is so curious but so brave at the same time, that is a much better impressionable, like that is a much better influential character than some, than a YA character that just that's just fallen or falling for some other, like for some other character in the book, right, out of nowhere. Like that, I know that happens, but the thing is, it doesn't have to happen if you're setting the example, right? Like I'd much rather like introduce my daughter to Horizon Zero Dawn faster than Throne of Glass. I don't mean that insultingly, Sarah J. Maas. Remember, I love you. I love your work, and we're just joking.
I mean, the thing is, you can like something and still criticize it.
Exactly.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to say, that I think heteronormative relationships and stories do that is really damaging, is because we've been talking about like different forms of relationships. Another thing that they do is they make people think of like romantic and sexual relationships as the most important relationship in someone's life, and as a result, we don't get enough focus on other kinds of relationships, like platonic relationships and familial relationships and that kind of stuff, which in my opinion should be equally as, if not more important than like a romantic relationship that started a week ago.
Yeah. Like I've said this for, like, to go off of that, I've said this for, I think in an episode with Jessica, and I think I've mentioned it with you too, Alex, like romantic subplots, or like romantic subplots in general, are the bane of my existence, because there is so much happening, especially when there's like fantasy involved in your story. There is so much happening that the character has to involve with, that like why you gotta deal with all the anxiety, and like why you have to like why do you have to add on a lot of unnecessary tension into the story when your character's already trying to save the world. And I know that that's such a small thing, but like on the grander scope of things, you can easily not do it, or at least you can save it for later, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and like the thing is, like, I get that sometimes relationships just happen even in the midst of all that kind of stuff. But like, I mean, if we want to go back to Throne of Glass for this, she's literally fighting like uh, I don't remember what those things are called, like the weird demons that are basically aliens or
The
whatever.
Valg.
Yeah, those guys. They're like these like extra dimensional creatures. And she has what, like 4 love interests in the across all the books.
Yeah. And that's just Throne of Glass. Like with, with City of Bones, there's monsters. With the Shatter Me series, there's a whole revolution. With the Hunger Games, there's there's a whole oppressive government. With the Maze Runner, there's like, with Maze Runner, there's like the whole maze. Apparently, there are so many amazing things that
the Maze Runner, it's the apocalypse. But
yeah, there are so many amazing things that authors have put in, and suddenly they're focusing on on a romantic relationship as some kind of tension, and I'm like, stop it.
Yeah. To be fair, I don't know if we can really include Hunger Games in that situation, because I feel like the like romance actually says something in those books.
Oh, I wasn't
but,
I wasn't saying it like that. I'm just saying like as an example of like how much or like the scope of the worlds that most books are going through, right? Like
there's so much going on, like, and like again, like I get sometimes relationships just happen in those scenarios, or like, or at the very least people start developing feelings. And this is another thing that I don't think books ever really address, but just because someone has like feelings for someone doesn't necessarily mean that they want to pursue a relationship with them. Like if you're in a situation like that where you're fighting to save the world and you're like, oh no, I've developed feelings for this person that I'm working with, but we don't have time to make this work, people might just like ignore them and push them aside and deal with them at a more convenient time. And I think you like almost never see that in stories, because people are always just like, oh, these two characters have feelings, obviously they're going to get together as soon as possible.
Yeah. And I think then even too, like it goes, like I had mentioned this earlier on how a lot of YA is obviously tailored towards young impressionable teenagers, which I think we need to stop doing that, or at the very least we just need to go back and tailor, like appeal to them with more interesting stories. Like ultimately there's so many more relationships that people have aside from romantic ones. And the fact that through movies and through books that so many teenagers are wanting relationships, I think like that's pretty damaging. Like it's been the focus of like
I don't want to like call anyone out, but I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day about like wanting to be in a relationship so desperately, and I'm like we're in our early 20s. Like there's time, and this is another thing that heteronormative relationships and books do, especially in YA, is that like a lot of the characters that you meet are teenagers, or like again in their early 20s. Like most of the characters,
God, yeah, I think I know where you're going.
Most of the characters in YA books are younger than I am, which feels weird to say, but that's how aging works. But like then they meet, like again, if we go back to Throne of Glass, where she has this whole mate system, which I don't even want to go off about because but like she meets her soulmate at what how old is she, like 20?
19.
She's 19. She's 19 and she meets her soulmate, the one person who's perfect for her and she's going to be with for the rest of her life. You know how many people actually stay with the person that they fall in love with at 19?
Yeah.
That's
fair.
so damaging. That's so damaging to so many people because, people get to like 25 and they're like, oh, I'm too old. I'm never going to find the one person who's perfect for me. And I think that's another thing that we need to do. Like, I know why novels tend to focus on like, young adults because that's who it's written about.
Hmm.
But we need more examples of people finding love later in life. And we need more examples of relationships that don't work out.
Yeah. So I think ultimately that's the biggest problem that YA or that heteronormativity pushes in is that if like is that relationships are an all or nothing, or at
Yeah.
least romantic relationships are an all or nothing, which, like you said, is super damaging. Like
So bad.
you can't expect to fall in love with someone at 19 and then suddenly like live with them for the rest of your life. Like that has happened before. There are exceptions, but largely people change over time. And that's something that I don't think a lot of stories in general kind of focus on. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, like there's the whole plot and stuff that the characters have to adhere to, but in real life, which where there are real people that these stories are going towards, the impression that you have as an author is imperative to how they perceive things. And this is towards like influencers, celebrities in general. Like your word matters. And if you're not setting a good word, then you're not going to have, or then you're setting a bad example for a whole bunch of people, right? It's super
Yeah.
important for not just fans of Sarah J. Maas to be aware of this. And like I said, and like Alex has said, you can enjoy the books, but don't be afraid to be critical of her work. And that goes for everyone. Like it goes for us even when we become authors. But basically, be aware of these things. Like be aware that heteronormative relationships are very, very, very fictitious. I think more so
Yeah.
than
And yeah,
more so than any
I've
other kind of
seen
relationship.
I've yeah, like I've seen like queer authors like write things about this where they've been like, when I was writing this story, out of habit I was just like, oh yeah, there's the girl and the guy and they're gonna end up together, and then realized that I didn't have to do that, and the only reason I was doing that was because of like heteronormative norms. And I've done that too, like in the Diamond Dagger originally, and I did have like a male love interest who she would end up with. And then I kind of got older and I'm like, but she wouldn't. That doesn't, like, they don't make sense as a
Mhm.
couple. I was just doing it because I felt that was what was expected of me.
Yeah. And if we're going to quickly touch on our old works, like Xeno for me has almost always started with Porter and Magna falling for each other. But the thing is, their relationship has changed so much, really. Like, it hasn't, like, the main focus from the original books or like from the original draft was that, they were supportive of each other as best friends, obviously, but there was still a lot of, like, but there was still some sexual intimacy there, which I don't want to say I've completely written out of the current iteration that I have, but the thing is, it's not the main focus.
Hmm.
Like, I don't want to paint a picture that, for especially because they are a same-sex relationship. It is super important that of how I portray the relationship,
Yeah.
right? Because I want to make sure that I'm setting a good example for girls of their age and girls younger than them, right? So, like, it's important for me to start understanding how a lot of heteronormative storytelling like works and how I cannot do it. Because if I impose heteronormative tropes and any kind of association with that into a same-sex relationship, then that'll be damning on me. And if
Yeah.
nothing else, if no one notices, which I doubt, but I will forever have to live with that. So,
Yeah.
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 Basically, as a final note to all authors out there, there's nothing wrong with writing straight relationships. There's also a lot of benefit to writing different kinds of straight relationships. And there's also, in our current climate, it is very, very important to start writing more diverse, either same-sex or ace relationships or everything like that. Like, tap into that. And if you aren't aware of where to start, ask people.